I think we'll go ahead and get started today. My name is Brian Gribben. I'm the coordinator for Special Collections, and I reached out to Randy to help share some of his research with us today. Our guest, Randy Gonzales, earned a BA in Communications with an emphasis in journalism from FHSU. Randy, you spent, 28 years as a sports editor and reporter for the Hayes Daily News. He's also worked for the University Relations and Marketing. Randy came back to FHSU to earn an MA in history. His master's thesis, The Kennedy Effect, John F. Kennedy's 1959 trip to Kansas, and its relationship to his national campaign, was born out of Randy's lifelong affinity for political history, his interest in JFK, and his curiosity in trying to understand why a Democratic presidential candidate would come to Kansas to campaign, especially in '59 when Kansas was, as it is today, still a very strong Republican state. So here to share his research with us, please welcome Randy Gonzales.
Thank you, Brian. That was a great introduction, and checks in the mail. I also want to thank Forsyth Library for having this exhibit. Once we roll the screen back up, you'll be able to take a closer look at it. It's kind of like hidden right now. And then also want to thank you all for being here. And this is a fun time for me, and hopefully you'll enjoy this and learn something. But if nothing else happens, there's free cookies. So that's where I'm headed right after we're done. But as Brian mentioned, that was my number one question when I started researching this topic for my thesis, was why the heck would John F. Kennedy, a Democratic senator from Massachusetts, why would he come to Kansas? I didn't even know he knew where Kansas was. But why would he come to Kansas? It's a Republican GOP state. Why would he even bother? He's not likely to win the general election. So my research is nothing about the general election. The reason that Kennedy came to Kansas was all about winning delegates for the Democratic primary. Now, what Kennedy knew was that, as opposed to the way they used to do elections, where the party bosses would be in the back rooms, they would decide, okay, Adlai Stevenson, you're going to run for president. Well, Kennedy knew the party bosses weren't going to pick him because he was young, inexperienced. The party bosses would say, no, it's not your turn. So Kennedy had to take his case to the people, and he ushered in a new way of campaigning. Instead of relying on the party bosses, what he did, he went to the people. He was in primaries. For the first time ever, they had 16 primaries that year in the '60 election. He went to every state in the Union in 57, 58, 59, meeting party leaders, local leaders, to earn their support as delegates for the National Convention. He knew he had to win on the first ballot. He knew that he had to win support from the delegates from all these states, including Kansas. He had to sidetrack the way that they used to do it. His mantra was in 2 words at the very end here: start early. That was Kennedy's style. He did this running for Congress. He started running for his congressional seat before his opponent, way before his opponent. He did that in 1952 when he ran for Senate for the first time. His opponent was not even thinking about the election, and he was already campaigning. And he did the same thing for the 1960 presidential election. Now, most historians agree that after the 1956 Democratic Convention, when Kennedy narrowly lost out being the vice presidential pick, that Kennedy started campaigning for the presidency unofficially after that fall's election. So 57, 58, 59, he went all across the country, shaking hands, eating chicken fried steak, and talking to people about, hey, consider me for the nomination. So most historians agree it's after the 56 convention for the Democrats. However, there are 2 historians who wrote a book that they make the argument that was 1955. What happened in 1955 was Lyndon Baines Johnson, the Senate Majority Leader, he had a heart attack in July. He's a Democrat. The Republican President, Dwight Eisenhower, 10 weeks later, he has a heart attack. Now, Joe Kennedy, the patriarch of the Kennedy family, he sees these two heart attacks and he smells opportunity. So what Joe Kennedy, the father, does, he goes to LBJ, who's still recovering from his heart attack, and Dwight Eisenhower is still in the hospital, says, hey, you run for president and make my son on the ticket with you, be your vice president. Now, there's no proof that LBJ took this seriously, but what it did do, it sparked an interest in Kennedy to consider running for the presidency. And so they put it out a little bit earlier. In their book, they call it the 5-year campaign for the presidency, the road to Camelot. So, but for Kennedy, what he wanted to do was start early. In 1957, he came to Kansas. In Topeka. 1958, he came to Kansas. He was in Kansas City for another fundraiser. 1959, and this is where most of my research was, he went to 5 cities over 2 days. A very ambitious schedule. He started out in Kansas City. On November 19th, he went to Wichita, he went to Dodge City, he went to Salina, he ended up in Hayes, and then he flies to Iowa. So, very quick. I mean, this is like modern campaigning, only it's 1959. So, first stop, Kansas City. Good old Harry Truman. Now, why does he want to talk to Harry Truman? I mean, Truman's in Missouri. It's a Truman Library. But he's a party elder, former president. Kennedy just wanted to see what Truman thought. Would he endorse him? As it turned out, Truman wouldn't endorse him, but he wanted to talk to him. Get a nice picture taken with him. And then he goes back into Kansas City, and he has 2 fundraising events. We learned from one report that Kennedy was suntanned, he had a cold, and his wife Jackie didn't make the trip. The reason Jackie didn't make the trip was their daughter Caroline just had a birthday. Otherwise, Jackie probably would have came along as well. And a lot of people in Hayes were disappointed that Jackie wasn't here. But he goes to Kansas City, he has 2 fundraisers, and then on the evening of the 19th, he goes to Wichita. And in Wichita, he has a fundraiser that night. And then after the fundraiser, he's hungry. It's about midnight. And so he and a state representative, Jack Glaves, they go to the Fairland Cafe, which is right there on the lower left, has chop suey on it, serves Chinese food. He's hungry as heck. So they go to this dump of a cafe, goes to this cafe at midnight, they eat Chinese food, and then Kennedy plays pinball. And Glaves, the state representative, goes, I didn't know he liked to play pinball. Nobody knew he liked to play pinball, but that's Kennedy just having fun in his off hours. Kennedy has another reception on the morning of the 20th, Friday the 20th, before he heads to Dodge City for a noon luncheon at the Civic Center. And this is a photo I really like. Who's that guy in the middle with that cowboy hat that looks real uncomfortable? Well, that's our candidate. Story behind this is that this is the Dodge City Posse, a group of businessmen and also some law enforcement officials. And he was made an official member of the posse, got a certificate, and he got his official hat. Kennedy hated wearing hats. This is the only other time that Inauguration Day that I've ever found a photo of Kennedy wearing a hat. The reason he didn't like to wear hats, messed up his hair. It's a little vain, you know. So, but here he is looking real uncomfortable wearing a hat. And one of the posse members said, yeah, it didn't look like it fit too well on top of his head. But he wore it. The only other time was Inauguration Day where he wore the stovepipe hat like Abe Lincoln. He wore a stovepipe hat on Inauguration Day. So anyway, in Dodge City, he meets the posse, and he goes, and he's talking with supporters after the luncheon, and he's waiting for his campaign plane to fly him to Salina for the next event. Now, while he's waiting, he's talking with ladies and gentlemen, and one of his aides comes up to him and says, Senator, the plane is ready. And Kennedy, on the spur of the moment, says, anybody want to ride with me to Salina on my campaign plane? And two ladies from Lyons, Kansas, who drove from Lyons to Dodge for the event, say, yeah, who wouldn't, And they say, yeah, I'd like to ride on that plane with you. Said, okay, you're coming with me. Now, one of the ladies later said that there was a gentleman there. And he also raised his hand and said, yeah, I'd like to ride on that plane too. And according to one of the ladies, Kennedy said, no, I want to have ladies on my plane. Now, people who knew Kennedy's reputation, I'll just leave it at that. But two ladies rode the plane. They go from Dodge City to Salina. And they're having the time of their life. They're talking with Kennedy, having fun. And the plane lands, and their husbands had to drive from Dodge City to Salina to pick them up. And then go back home to Lyons. So, hey, husbands did their due duty. But they go from Dodge City to Salina. And here's a photo of Kennedy talking with students at Marymount College after his speech. He was in Salina a very short time, maybe hour and a half, not very long at all, because he had to get to Hayes. He's already running an hour behind schedule. But so Salina is important in that his campaign plane is a problem. He has to get to Hayes, fly to Hayes. His plane is a twin-engine Convair, and it's too big for the Hayes Airport. It was a small grass airstrip about where 13th and Canterbury is now, about around Hayes High. And that small grass airstrip could not accommodate his plane landing. So Norbert Dreiling, who facilitated Kennedy's appearance coming to Hayes, who was the head of the 6th Congressional District, he knew about this ahead of time. So he had Don Pratt, who had a plane, and was head of the airport. He had the airport manager fly his plane to Salina to pick up Kennedy. And after he's done with the Hayes trip, he flew him back. Now, penciled in the itinerary, for the travel itinerary, one of Kennedy's aides wrote that Kennedy flew from Salina to Hayes in this plane, but the press had to travel by car. So, the press didn't deserve a plane ride. So, as a former member of the press, I should take offense, but I don't. But, so Kennedy gets to Hayes, and Norbert Dreiling, you have a picture of him at the banquet with Kennedy, and some of the girls that were servers that night from Girls Catholic. Norbert Dreiling, as I said, played a big role in Kennedy coming to Hayes. Norbert was the 6th Congressional District Chairman from 1950, and then in 57, 58, and 59, he had fundraising dinners. Now, the 6th Congressional District would be the northwest corner of the state back then. Right, it would be part of the Big First District now, but it was divided differently back then. So Norbert was in charge of 26 counties as the chairman. And so Norbert, he met with Kennedy and met with Kennedy aides and other Democratic officials in 1958, and then met with them again in 59, and eventually they decided that, okay, we'll include Hayes on this trip. And Hayes was a Democratic stronghold at the time. Kansas was a sea of blue, a sea of red, and Ellis County was an island of blue. It was a very different time back then. Now, a little bit more about Norbert. His first date with Donna Jean Dreiling. Back then, it was Donna Jean Meyerly, a family from Waukene. Now, on your first date, here's what happens. On a Saturday afternoon, he calls the women's dorm at Fort Hayes, and he wants to find a girl to go on a date with. On a Saturday afternoon for that night. There's nobody around at the dorm. They're all gone, except Donna Jean was there. And he kind of knew, he knew a little bit about Donna Jean. So I said, yeah, I'd like to, you want to go out on a date with me? We'll go to the movies. So they double date. They go to the movies. Donna Jean remembers as Bing Crosby going my way. Afterwards, they're too late to get to the dorm. They missed curfew. Well, since they missed curfew anyway, they said, okay, we'll just stay and talk a while. So there was a lily pond on the quad at the time, and they just sat there by the lily pond, just talking. So let me ask you this. What would you normally talk about on a first date? Like your family, your hobbies, things you like to do, you know, that sort of thing. You know, just get to know them. No, not Norbert. Norbert, he tells Donna Jean on their very first date that how disillusioned he is with the Democratic Party. That he's so disillusioned that he's thinking about becoming a Republican. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking. That's probably what Donna Jean was thinking. They're a strong Democratic family from Waukene. But he says, yeah, I mean, I just had it up to here. You know, I just cannot stand the Democratic Party right now. I'm thinking about leaving. Donna Jean, on their first date, they're talking about big life decisions. They're not talking about, you know, I like apple pie or not. She convinces him to remain a Democrat. And Norbert, for the rest of his life, always credited Donna Jean and that conversation that evening for him remaining a Democrat. And I always wonder how life would have been different if Norbert Dreiling was a Republican instead of a Democrat. Would he be bringing in a Democratic presidential candidate? Would he be bringing in Nixon? Oh, just a second. So I have to compose myself. But that was Norbert, and that was Donna Jean. And once Norbert did that, they had the press conference. But first, before the press conference, I'll get to Harold here in a second. Norbert, the very first thing that JFK did, he went with Norbert to KAYS to give a live TV interview. And now Ed and Georgia Moore, who ran a travel agency here in town, they're Republicans. But they also wanted to see JFK. There's no way they're going to be at this Democratic banquet that night. But they knew, they saw the sirens and the police escort going by their place to the TV and radio station. And so they gathered up the kids and the neighbors' kids, and they went to the TV and radio station to try and meet JFK. Well, they were waiting in the hallway, and JFK's done with his interview finally, and he and Norbert and a couple other people are walking down the hallway, and Norbert sees his good friends, Ed and Georgia, and they stop and they say hi, and Norbert makes the joke that, Senator, here's Ed and Georgia Moore, and these are likely the only two Republicans you're going to see tonight. Everybody had a nice laugh, a nice chuckle. But, you know, Senator Kennedy shakes hands with Ed Moore. He shakes hands with his wife, Georgia. And he goes to shake hands with 12-year-old Ed Jr. And hello there. Ed Jr. would not shake his hand. Ed Jr. says, no, you're a Democrat and we're a Republican. So I don't know if Ed Jr. has ever lived this down or not, especially if he reads my thesis. But so that was kind of a little funny incident. And as it turned out, Ed voted for JFK and Georgia did not. Ed voted for him because they both served in World War II. And Georgia didn't agree with his politics. Now we go to Harold Stone's. We have a press conference here on campus in the Memorial Union by the spiral staircase. And Harold Stone's was the debate coach. He had just graduated, written his master's thesis on Kennedy's foreign policy. Now Norbert knew about this, and he wrote Harold Stone's a letter ahead of time asking Harold if he would like to accompany him all across Hayes as they went to different events, because he knew how much Harold admired Kennedy in writing his thesis. And Harold goes, yeah, you know, no problem. So Harold Stone's, at the time of his life, went everywhere. This is the photo after the news conference. He was able to talk privately with Kennedy. He said it was one of the highlights of his life. Now we get to John Ivan. He also was at the press conference. These are the two photos from the press conference. John Ivan president of Young Democrats, and here he is thanking Kennedy after the news conference. Now, Norbert, he wanted John Ivan to introduce Kennedy at the press conference. Okay, John Ivan he's scared to death. He doesn't like public speaking, but he says, okay, I'm going to do it. He has his notes prepared, he's ready to do it. And Norbert forgets to introduce Kennedy. So John Ivan is just sitting there on the stage, quivering. He says, my legs were shaking. And all while Kennedy's giving his press conference. But yet at the same time, he's thinking, hey, I didn't have to talk. Well, Kennedy gives his remarks. He's getting ready to leave. And Norbert looks at John Ivan and goes, oh my gosh, I forgot to have John Ivan talk. So Norbert says, John Ivan, give some closing remarks. Like, what? He was not ready for closing remarks. He wasn't ready for anything. But John Ivan overcame his stage fright, gave closing remarks, and he said that was the best thing that ever happened to him because it overcame his stage fright for the rest of his life. So I guess it turned out well for him anyway. Here's a great picture of girls before the banquet from Girls Catholic, Kennedy for President signs. No, they did not make them themselves. Norbert thought ahead, and he had signs made at the printers. He picked them up that morning, and he distributed them. So, sorry, girls, you didn't make them. But they were there. That was part of the plan to introduce Kennedy as his motorcade comes to which was then called Jefferson West, now called Kennedy Middle School. And plus, in between the press conference to the banquet, though, there was a parade. We had a parade that night. 6:30 at night, wasn't that cold. Now, for those of you that are familiar with Hayes, where do parades go? They go from like 14th Street down to 7th Street by the Historical Society, right? They go south. Nope, not that night. They went the opposite direction. Now, why would this parade go from 7th Street up to 14th? Okay, think about it. Okay, the reason being, you're right next to Kennedy Middle School. So the parade ends, you just have to jog over a couple blocks and there you are. Otherwise, you'd have to go all the way down from 7th Street. So Norbert thought ahead about that. We're going to have the parade go in the other directions. In the parade was a band from Victoria, a band from St. Joe's Military Academy, and Kennedy West had a band with some members from Kennedy East there also. Or Jefferson West, excuse me. And the Hayes Daily News reported the parade wasn't very long, but it was a great parade. Because the bands were the highlight, and following the bands were a bunch of limousines with politicians in them. So take that as you may. If anybody ever has a photo of that parade, hook me up. I never have found a photo of the parade. It was at night, which is probably part of the problem back then. Banquet program. This is an original program that was given to me by the collection of Norbert Dreiling. And it has a couple holes in it because Norbert, he punched them out and put them in binders after he's done with them. I know as a historian you go, oh my gosh, you don't do that. But, so this is one side of the program. And at that banquet, it was a Friday evening in 1959 in a German Catholic community. So, what's a German Catholic community? What are you having for supper? Fish. Yeah. Well, they had chicken fried steak. Now, before you go, oops, Norbert thought ahead. Again, Norbert had the bishop grant a special dispensation to allow the Catholics to eat meat. And he has that on the inside of the program. You open up the program, and there it is. You're allowed to eat meat. Well, not these terms, but basically, you're allowed to eat meat. So everybody had chicken fried steak dinner. There were 645 people in attendance in the gym at Jefferson West, now Kennedy Middle School. 645 people. It's supposed to be in the cafeteria, but so many people got tickets, they moved it to the gym. Tickets back then were $10 for men, $5 for women. No, I'm not going there. But they were. And the equivalent of today, a $10 ticket would be $88. So that's how expensive in those times those tickets were. But still, sold out the whole northwest corner of the state. He had, Dreiling had county chairman of all 26 counties out selling tickets. So he had people from all 26 counties, not just Hayes, at that banquet. So we have the banquet, everybody's eating chicken fried steak, everybody's having a good time. But wait, only 644 people ate chicken fried steak, not 645. One person requested fish, and that person was John F. Kennedy. A devout Catholic, and probably for political purposes too, that anybody got wind that, hey, this Catholic running for president ate chicken fried steak on a Friday, just to be safe, but he ate fish. He requested fish. So that's a nice little nugget of information I found out. Also at the banquet, there was, and this is a picture of the banquet, of Norbert Dreiling speaking with Kennedy. If you look real closely on the table decorations, there's a donkey in the middle there. One thing I didn't mention on the menu for dessert was apple pie a la Democrat. And that's the way Norbert had it written on his memo pad. So as a good researcher, I'm thinking like, what the heck is apple pie a la Democrat? So I did some checking around. What apple pie a la Democrat means is, back in the day, in 1959, it was popular to have cheddar cheese on top of apple pie. Well, Norbert had the idea, he wanted that cheddar cheese in the shape of a donkey to represent the Democratic Party. So he had the lady who was in charge of the meal say, hey, can you, Catherine Bruhl, can you help me out here? So she had her son go into the shop and welded a mold in the shape of a donkey. So they cut out the cheddar cheese, and all 645 plates had a donkey on top. So that's apple pie a la Democrat. So this ends his 4 to 5 hours in Hayes. He goes to Salina, gets his regular plane, and then he goes to Iowa and continues the campaign there. Now, Kennedy did win the election. I know, I'm spoiler alert. But Kansas played a role in the convention, a role that they probably would rather not people know too much about. What happened, you have the roll call of delegates, you know. The great state of Kansas casts all 20 votes for the next president, you know, all that, you know. Well, Norbert Dreiling did his homework, and the Kansas delegation, before the roll call, he knew ahead of time it was hopelessly split right down the middle as far as delegates. And back then, Kansas was a unit rule state, which meant that, say that you have 10 delegates, and 6 of you are for Kennedy and 4 of you are for someone else. Kennedy gets all 10 votes. That's unit rule. Winner take all. There was no winner. They were hopelessly split. Half of them wanted Kennedy, half of them wanted Stuart Symington, the Missouri senator. So, Norbert and Robert Docking, the son of George Docking, who was the governor of the state at the time and future governor of the state in the 1960s. So Robert Docking, George's son, Norbert, and Bobby Kennedy, JFK's brother, they all cornered this one delegate in a hotel bathroom and tried to convince him to switch over to Kennedy. I would love to have been a fly on the wall to hear that conversation. This guy was Paul Allward, Ellsworth attorney. He was a Symington man. He was in the 6th district, and Norbert tried to flip him. As a matter of fact, Norbert was so sure he could flip him that instead of having Robert Glassman be a delegate from the 6th district, who was solidly JFK, he decided to have Allward be a delegate and try to flip him to be a JFK delegate as well. You know, tried to to make them feel good, feel important. Okay, you're a delegate. Well, in retrospect, if Norbert hadn't done that, they would have never had to corner anybody in a hotel bathroom because JFK would have won. But did not happen. The roll call comes. Kansas has to pass. And there were some pundits at the time that thought Kansas passed as a strategy, that it's going to come back around, that Kennedy won't win at the end of the first ballot, then Kansas will come in to save the day and put him over the top. That wasn't the case. Kansas just couldn't agree, couldn't get its act together. But Wyoming did get its act together. At the very end of the roll call, Kennedy was this close to going over the top. And if Wyoming would have put all of their delegates in the Kennedy camp, he would win. So Edward Kennedy contacted the Wyoming delegation and says, hey, instead of splitting your vote, if you all go for JFK, you get the honor of putting him over. So that's what they did. So Wyoming puts him over the top. Now, when we go to the general election, about 2-3 weeks before the election, Norbert has written a series of letters to the Kennedy campaign, and he predicts that Ellis County will be carried by Kennedy by a 2-to-1 margin. I mean, he says that in 2 different letters. Come election night, only Nebraska had a higher percentage for Nixon than Kansas. It was like 60-40 for Nixon. But two counties went for Kennedy, Wyandotte, urban Kansas City, and good old Ellis County. Ellis County had the highest percentage of vote total for Kennedy, 65%. So Norbert was right on with that 2-to-1 margin. Now, once the Kennedy is his presidency, part of my thesis, I was wondering, you know, Kennedy started early for his congressional campaign. He started early for his Senate campaign. He started early for 1960 presidential campaign. So I'm wondering, did he do the same thing planning for 64? He did. Kennedy in 64, he didn't do it. In 1962, after 62 midterms, Kennedy loyalists were planning for 1964. And even though Kennedy lost Kansas big, and Kansas was in the loser column, they had like sure thing on our column, they had battleground states, and then they had states we're going to be losers in. Even though Kansas was in a loser state, he still wanted to put an effort in Kansas to help down ballot, to help other people campaigning. So, 1963, November 13th of 63, they hold their first strategy meeting with JFK. Prior to this, it was all his aides strategizing. They have a nice long meeting, lasts most of the afternoon. Kennedy reveals his 1964 campaign theme, peace and prosperity. Kennedy thinks he has to go to a dinner engagement. He says, hey, this is a great meeting. Let's meet again in a week or two. And that was November 13th, and we all know what happened on November 22nd in Dallas. Norbert was crestfallen by JFK's assassination. He wrote long editorials in the Ellis County Farmer, remembering the trip to Hayes in 1959. And, it hit Norbert really hard. Norbert did have a political career also. He went on to become Robert Docking, the guy that was in the hotel bathroom that night. He was his campaign chairman and the chair of the state Democratic Party. Robert Docking, with Norbert behind the scenes, won an unprecedented 4 2-year terms as governor, as a Democrat. Back then they had 2-year terms. And then Norbert went on. After his official life was over, he became a party elder. People running for office would come by and seek his advice and counsel. He practiced law all the way up until the very end. He had Parkinson's disease. He still came to the office right up till the very end. He passed away in 2005 at the age of 80. The thing that we'll remember Norbert for is his sharp wit and ability to get things done, as shown by the 1959, plus 58 and 57. I didn't mention that. 57, he had a keynote speaker for a fundraiser, and it was a senator from Oklahoma. In 58, the keynote speaker, to show the power that he had in the party, was the chairman of the National Democratic Party, Paul Butler. He came to Hayes the year before, and then JFK the year after. So Norbert had connections. And I'll just summarize a little bit. We've talked about this. Norbert, about Kennedy's, was winning delegates starting early. Pretty self-explanatory. And at the very end here, I'd just like to tell you about a couple more events here on campus that are free, that you can attend in a couple weeks. November 19th, we're going to have a panel discussion about the Kennedy effect of his visit to Hayes, and also how Norbert Dreiling was involved. That's going to be at the 4 Days Ballroom at 7 p.m. I say free and open to the public. The panelists will be John Bird, who was a protege of Norbert Dreiling, a longtime member of Ellis County Democratic politics, the chair of the political science department, Larry Gould, and some guy who wrote a thesis. I can't remember his name. It might be me. So if you want to hear me talk again, you get another chance. So then also on November 20th, the day of a banquet that we're going to have a historical commemoration / press conference of Thomas Oliphant, who's going to be the keynote speaker at the banquet. Mr. Oliphant is the one who wrote that book, Road to Camelot. And their book, they're the ones that talk about the heart attacks, and that was the reason why Kennedy started in 55 and not 56. Mr. Oliphant is the keynote speaker, and he'll be answering questions at 3:30 p.m. at the Memorial Union, right next door to where Kennedy had his press conference 60 years ago. And then if you're interested in the banquet that night, that Mr. Oliphant will be the speaker, it's at the same location as 60 years ago, and we're having the same menu as 60 years ago, including apple pie a la Democrat. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the JFK in Hayes, Kansas Facebook page, or you can catch me afterwards here. And that's all I have. If you have any questions, be happy to try and answer.
Yeah, I've heard a story several times about JFK being convinced to visit a small town south of Hayes while he was here.
I've heard that too. I can't prove it, but I've heard it.
I've heard it several times, slightly different versions of it, but they were all about the same thing, about how they promised him all the votes in that town or something.
Yeah, Shin Shin.
Yes.
Shin Shin.
Chanting, yeah, that's what
I've heard that from a couple of different people, but again, there's nothing in the historical record that shows that he did that, so I couldn't put it in my thesis, but it's a great story. He may have very well done it.
Right, I've heard it from multiple sources.
Well, then there's someone else that says that he, on the way to the KYS interview, that he stopped at someone's house. There's nothing in the historical record about that either. But so obviously I can't put that in there, but it's fun.
Was KAYS at the same place
Yes.
it is now?
Yes.
Well, Norbert Dreiling's house was only about 3 houses from where that station was, so it could have.
Well, it wasn't Norbert's house.
Oh, it was.
No, it was another house.
Okay.
And the name escapes me right now, but it definitely wasn't Norbert's. But yeah, but they were close by that police escort. They could hear the sirens. So, and then the Moores didn't live too far away either, and they heard the sirens and they decided to go to KYS. So, yes.
Randy, do you know if the dispensation was for all Catholics in Ellis County or just the ones that went to the meal?
I think it's just the ones at the banquet. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known about it.
There's a note up on when he pulls that up, the thing is there that shows the note about the dispensation.
Yeah, it was just for the people there.
Yeah.
Well, that-
So, otherwise, you had to eat fish. Yes?
Can you talk about your research process? Like, how did you
Oh, yes, good question. I was very fortunate that Norbert Dreiling's grandson, Jackson, in 2008, he was planning on writing a book about his grandfather and his political career. Well, Jackson got a lot of material, like 2 big boxes full of material, but never wrote the book, but he kept it. And so he learned that I was doing my thesis, and so they were kind enough to give that family material, his collection of papers, some of them anyway, to me. And without that collection of papers, the thesis would not have been anywhere near where it was. I also made extensive use of the JFK library online. I printed off enough documents to kill a forest, probably well over 100 documents just from the JFK library. And then a lot of interviews. There's still a lot of people still alive. Harold Stones and John Ivan still alive. John Ivan called me yesterday. He's planning on coming. Harold Stone sent me an email, said that he's going to try and make it. So that'd be great if both of those guys could be here.
Tell him who Harold Stone works for now, or worked for many years.
I mean Pat Roberts?
Yes, yeah. I just want, he went from being a
A
fan
Kennedy guy,
to being
a Pat Roberts guy.
yes.
Tell
Yes.
us more about John Ivan.
John Ivan, he's 80 years old, and he's still practicing law in the Kansas City area. And he told me over the phone probably like 10 or 12 different cases he's working on right now. And he's full of vim and vigor, and he's still going at it strong. And he and his girlfriend are coming. So I said, okay, we'll give you two tickets. We'll gladly sell them to you. So yeah, so John Ivan, he's originally from Russell. John Ivan was. So, and Harold Stone's, name escapes me where he's originally from, but I remember John Ivan is from Russell. Yes?
This could be kind of a controversial question, so I want to be
Hey,
careful how I ask.
That's why we're here.
How much did, in Ellis County, Catholicism interview, because, you know, it was a Democratic stronghold, but relative to other counties, was it just a higher incidence of, because I can remember that Kennedy was the first Catholic candidate, and it was very controversial.
Al Smith
He was
ran in
from
28,
Mars,
yeah.
you know, and
He wasn't the first candidate, he was the first one elected.
sorry?
He wasn't the first Catholic candidate, he was the first one elected.
He wasn't the first Catholic
Al
candidate?
Smith
Al
in
Smith.
28, I think it was.
Oh,
He-
I'll learn something new there.
He lost it on landslide.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's interesting, because you would have thought it was the first, I mean,
Yeah.
in my lifetime.
And my thesis goes, there's a good section of the thesis talking about the origins of the Volga Germans and Catholicism, and how the Volga Germans evolved into becoming part of the Democratic Party. So that was fascinating too, just to learn, because Norbert was, Volga German, his family was Volga German. So the Volga Germans were kind of like on the outside looking in as far as the establishment parties, and so they felt trod upon, and so they gravitated to the Democratic Party. Also, in the 20s, when Prohibition came along, the Volga Germans liked their beer, so they were anti-establishment over there, so that also was part of it too. Anybody else?
Why did he choose chicken fried steak in such a Catholic community on a Friday night?
That's a good question. I have no answer to it. I like chicken fried steak, but
Well, did he think it would be that more people would come because it was chicken fried steak? Because he was inviting, they had, what, 600 people at the banquet?
645.
It was a $10 dinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Steak at one.
Yeah, matter of fact, I don't have the answer for that, for why they didn't have fish. There were a lot of non-Catholics there too, but
I wondered if that was why it wasn't,
Yeah.
because he was trying to get people from all of
yeah.
Northwest Kansas.
We're considering having one fish dinner on the 20th, and either make Mr. Oliphant eat it, or have a plate set with a fish dinner on it and have a reservation for John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, that would be neat.
So we're thinking about doing that. So, won't be me eating fish, I'm eating the chicken fried steak. So, anybody else? All right, that does it. Thanks very much. Grab the cookies. Thank you.